Hello and welcome to another episode of Pokémath. A very special episode today indeed, because I am joined by Colin Mole. Welcome, Colin.
Hi, it's good to be here with you.
It's good to have you here, because what are we going to do today? We're going to look at the results of that survey we posted a few weeks back.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to going through that with you today.
I'm very excited about this, and I can already tell people out there we are in for some very interesting results. So, you know what? Without further ado, shouldn't we just get started?
I agree, absolutely.
Oh, fantastic. So, we kind of already signaled what we're going to be doing today. So now I'm sitting here with a beautiful slide saying what are we going to do today. But the point is, we're going to go over a descriptive analysis. There's, of course, a lot more analysis to do, as we're both going to see later. But this is just to give everybody a feel for where are we actually going with this. And, well, we do have some results also on some experiment. And yes, before you say something, there was an experiment, actually, 2 included in here. So we got some treats for you guys today. But before we get there, I got some preliminary numbers for you. So I don't have to say so much, but the idea is to hear that Colin and I, we were very surprised with the huge number of respondents here. People have been so nice filling out the survey. We've got more than 1,100 people who actually start the survey. However, there was only 802 that completed the survey. And after some cleanup, let's call it that, that's what it is, some data cleaning, we were left with 795, which is a very respectable number. Therefore, I can with confidence say, I believe we have enough respondents here to have a very nice statistical analysis with a lot of, the term we use is power. Sounds very nice here, but we have a lot of power. We have enough power. Definitely a large enough sample size. So, what is your feeling about this, Colin? This is pretty good.
I was really impressed with the response rate. You know, I think it really shows that people care about the topic that we were asking about. You know, of course, we did offer a prize, but, you know, I think people cared more about the topic than the very low chances of winning the 3 Elite Trainer boxes. So I was very impressed.
I can only say that, of course, congratulations to the winners. Gonna get to that at the end. But indeed, I was also so amazed when you told me during the week, oh, we hit 200, 400, 600. Like, oh my God, that was so much. But I want to give everybody some cleanup notes because I think you deserve to know what kind of people did I actually remove here. Because people could think, yeah, but Stefan is just data mining. That is just, cheats. He's getting the results he wants. But I think it's fair to say that what you're seeing on screen right now, so you see it up here, you see the people that was aged 3,830. I had to remove them. There was somebody who's claimed they played more than 500 hours of PGO a week. While I admire that, whether that's possible, that's a whole other question. There are also some people who claimed that they played the game for more than 25 years. Interesting. How long did the game, exist so far, Colin? Do you remember?
Yeah, we're in our 25th year celebration.
Exactly. So it's really funny to see people who go for like, oh, I played this for more than 25 years. Right. Then we also have more than one that found it interesting to say they lived on Antarctica. No, guys, no. And lastly, we only consider complete responses because otherwise, when you're doing the analysis, say somebody didn't answer all of the rumination questions, which we're very interested, of course, well, unfortunately, it doesn't contribute to our analysis, of course, so we had to include or exclude these people. It's unfortunate, but still, 795. Wow. So, let's just dive into it, Colin. I can't wait anymore.
Absolutely.
We start with the first symbol descriptive graph. And what we're going to see a lot of here, there's a graph and then there's a simple statistics below. I apologize if some of it is very small. We are going to explain the best way we can, but sometimes it's hard to fit things and other times I was just lazy. Oops. But, we first asked here as kind of a gatekeeper question. Do you currently play Pokemon TCG? Either online or in person? So, is this as you expected, Colin?
It is. So, 94% said yes, they do. And then about 6 said they don't currently play. I expect most of those 6% have played in the past, or are just taking a break right now and intend to return. You see a lot of that, at least in my friend group, but I'm sure across the community. So I would say the vast majority of people, obviously currently play, but probably everyone has some relationship to the trading card game that we know and love, for sure.
I think the most important thing we also have to not forget here is that the way we delivered the survey was through means like Verbank. A lot of nice YouTubers teamed up and streamers promoted this survey. Everybody in the the Pokemon TCG community. So it was very much geared to only be seen by people in the community. Therefore, I also think that explains why the number of people who are playing is very high, of course.
Definitely.
But yeah, that was a nice, interesting start. Let's go on to the next thing we have here, because we first looked at, well, how old are you? So how old are people in the sample? And we see an average age here of about 27 years old, which is, I found that to be actually, personally, exactly what I expected. Mid-20s. That was kind of what I had the feel for, because we get a nice, well, division of people who play this game for a little bit, but also people who are really considered older players, of course. And then...
Yeah. Suppose that's a little younger than I thought, actually. I thought they'd be a little bit closer to my age, so I'm 32, and I started like right when the game was released when I was 10 years old.
Wait, you're older than me, Colin? I didn't know. I'm 31, by the way, so it's close, but just...
This is younger than I thought, which is, I think, great. Absolutely, it's great.
Yeah, we had we have a minimum age of 13 up to a maximum of 56. I think that's a very nice spread, to be honest. Yes. I must admit there was 2 very young people in here, and I removed that because I did not find that responsible to include that in a rumination survey. I didn't find that representative. Whether people agree or disagree with that, I will glad to hear their opinion, but I think anything below 13, at least at this point here, I wouldn't consider. And we only talked about, I think, a total of 3, which I still think is a very small selection.
Definitely.
Which, then we have whether this pandemic, which is for many people still ongoing, a lot of people are still affected by different measures, lockdown or restrictions in general, whether, that caused you to play more. And I'm not gonna lie, I think it's very interesting that more people, it was mostly more TCG got played. I would expect it less, but that's maybe because my personal view was like, I played less. What about you, Colin?
Yeah, this pandemic has been very strange. I think, at least in the States, when we received our first stimulus check from the government early last year, I heard lots of reports of people using that to buy singles, because, we're all in lockdown across the States, and I think there was a lot of interest in gaming, renewed interest in gaming, and I think with that interest paired with the sudden injection of some money, a lot of people started buying Pokemon cards. So it's, in some ways, if I had seen this early last year, I would have been stunned. But seeing it now, it's not as surprising to me. I'm just kind of based on what I've seen, in the States, regards to the pandemic and the trading card game.
Upon a closer look on this here, we also see, of course, that it almost evens out, right? Like we have about 42% who played more, but then again, 38% who played less, and then about 20% that played, well, the same. So it sort of evens out. There's, of course, it's a little more tilted towards playing more, but it still follows relatively close. Would be interesting to see how the age segments divides over this here. That could be an interesting thing. Let's carry on. There's a lot more to discuss. So now we come to something with hours spent on Pokemon TCG and hours playing. So the difference here is when you're playing, well, you're physically playing in real person or in real life or online. the other one, or the first graph on the left side here, also includes your time spending on watching YouTube videos, reading articles, anything related to Pokemon TCG. So of course I find that very interesting, because there's something here that doesn't really add up to me. Maybe that's something that we missed in terms of the way we asked, something that was misunderstood, because when we ask how much you played, we get an average of above 8 hours. But when we ask them hours, well, PTGO, so in this case here, just hours that they spend on Pokemon TCGO, we get only 7.5 hours. So I'm not quite sure what happened here, to be honest, because I would have expected, of course, logic would dictate it should be the other way around, right? Sorry for that.
Yeah, so I do wonder if we had, if the question might have been misleading, but, to me, it's certainly confirmation that people tend to play about 8 hours a week.
Well, yeah, that's important. Yeah, I completely missed that point. It's like 8 hours a week seems like just about the time you play a week. Yeah. Oh, that I missed. But yeah, that's and we of course have some high flyers that they spend 40 to 50 hours. We do see on the graphs here like a few pops up here at 40 and the highest of 50, and again up against 40 and 50 on both of them actually. So we do of course have some outliers in the sense that they play a lot of Pokemon TCG. So now let's carry on to see how often you played before the pandemic. Like what happened? Like before you played, did you play? We have a lot of people who say never or less than once per year. That's actually a huge segment. This could indeed tell us about the people who started playing because of the pandemic. You started to play online. A lot of people picked up the game. And of course, most of the people here, they go at a few times a month, which honestly would be the same. I would go and play events or something a few times a month. But that's personally speaking, of course. What about you, Colin?
How often did I play before the pandemic?
Yeah.
It was, I took a break playing the game between 2014 and 2019, and I started playing again at the very end of 2019. So I only had a few months of playing again before the pandemic hit. And so I was probably doing maybe 3 to 4 events a month. So, those were almost entirely league cups and league challenges, although I did one regional before everything was shut down in March. So, I would probably fall into the a few times a month category of the 29.6%. So that's where I would probably fit.
It seems the same here.
I was surprised by the 30% that never played. And so I wonder if that's potentially professors that are responding that they didn't play in events, but they, helped organize. It could just be people that just like to play online and don't like to go to events in person, or maybe they can't access events in person. So that was really interesting to see.
That's a really good point here, because we could of course also later segment the data to see whether people who are Pokemon professors, sure, just because you're a professor doesn't mean you're not playing. A lot of people, they are Pokemon professors just because they can, and sometimes they judge or organize. But it could be interesting to see whether that's where most of that segment comes from. Or if anybody's watching this out here now, then, well, let us know if you want to say, hey, I was one of the people who played less than once per year, and maybe why. It would be super interesting to hear. Well, that brings us indeed to the professor questions. On this slide, there's actually 2 things we considered. We have here, did you attend league? So whether you actively went to a Pokemon league, and whether you're currently a professor. And we do see about 58% who went to league, and still 42% that didn't go to league. Is that as you expected? Like, would that make sense?
I suppose it is as I expected. I think for most of my time playing Pokemon, I attended a league, and in those few months that I played before the pandemic, I hadn't found a league that worked for my schedule. It's just, I think, hard to commit to attending a league every week. In our average, the people in our age group or in our survey are 27 years or older. So I suppose, now that I think it through a bit, that's pretty good, I think. That 60% of our folks who tend to be older go to a league.
I think it shows pretty well that it could also be because they're the league leaders. That could be as well.
True, absolutely.
But we do see that it's a very low percentage of people here. I went low and low, but it's about 1/5 that are Pokemon professors. So the vast majority here, of course, you can't be a Pokemon professor if you're under 18. So that's, of course, a chunk of the data that's gone right there. But still 20% a Pokemon professor. Not bad. I don't think there's much I can say about that at this point here, but it's an interesting covariate to have in the further analysis to do to see whether it actually makes a difference.
I agree, absolutely.
Because I don't know about you, but I have an idea that, of course, there are some standards you are adhered to if you're a professor. There's these core values, of course, of which we would maybe expect that people who are Pokemon professors are more, say, truthful in their answers. Going to discuss that a lot later here today, but thought it would be interesting just to point out. Now, we're getting there soon, but first we have to discuss sex versus gender. And it's good to have you on board today, Colin, because first of all, I want to make clear to everybody watching this or listening to this, we're not trying to offend anyone. 100%, that's not what we're trying to do. We listen to the suggestions and we included both a question for sex and gender to kind of include everyone, because it is very hard from a point of view of an analysis to deal with the prefer not to answer or non-binary or everything. There's a lot of challenges, and we of course include everyone, but I just wanted to highlight that when it comes to analyzing this later, typically, for instance, sex and gender has traditionally just been seen as a 0 or 1 variable, a dummy or binary we call it, which makes it easy for analysis. But if you introduce something like in between, then you're going to have to make some very tough assumptions, which I don't want to make. Are people half male, half female, more male than more female? You can already see where this is going to go. So we're not trying to offend anyone. We included everybody we could include, and if we missed anybody, we're sorry for that. We really tried our best here. But with that said, and let me know if I'm wrong here, Colin. I just think it's very important to state.
I just have a couple things to say before we move on to the next slide.
We're not, of course, we're not done here yet.
Right. I think the kind of the survey techniques used to assess sex and gender and other ways to identify ourselves is rapidly evolving. And so I think, and there's, conflicting guidance on how to ask these questions, particularly gender. Now there's, a camp that says ask everything, and then there's a camp that says, have a reasonable list. And so it's a balancing act that I think, Stefan and I will continue to get better at. And I think the field in general will get better at these questions too. I just wanted to make the point that, the field is evolving. And I think we will just get better and better with how to ask these questions and how to kind of get to the information that we're looking to get. And the other thing I wanted to say is that, I did a paper as part of my master's program on mental health in the Pokemon trading card game community. And I did a look at, some of the descriptives just in the Burbank City Gym Facebook group, which has obviously a large following. And they had about 90% of their members that identified as male. So it was good to see confirmation that, what we're finding here seems to reflect our community, which is good to know.
I think that's spot on, because of what I also wanted to say was when you're out playing events or everything, it kind of confirms the picture you used to see, that there's a lot of males there, and it's nice to see that at least the analysis that we did here, the survey we did here, confirmed that picture. Mm-hmm. I think that's very
Absolutely.
Nice. But it's thanks for also filling in on the blanks here on the comments here, because I think this is it's of course something very important, and we of course have to evolve with it. but I can only say from the economic standpoint. So I mostly read literature in the field of economics. I'm not going to say that they're not the most progressive literature yet. So they are working towards it. I can definitely say that people are being a lot more inclusive now than they were even just 10 years ago. But there's still some ways to go. But it's nice to see that it's evolving and following the trend that we see in society. So I can only say that this is moving the right way. But from an analysis point of view, that still has to be worked on. But we're doing our best.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, let's dive into, people's education. Like, how many years of schooling have you completed? This one is one that I must say requires a closer look before I use it for analysis. I just gave it a quick clean because it's very hard for people to assess how many years of schooling they had. I figured out, because a lot of people were mismatching this question with the next question about what degree you attained, and there's a lot of people that maybe misunderstood it or for whatever reason did give correct answers. But we see a mean of 14 years, almost 15 years. That corresponds very well with people finished high school. And I'm thinking here like it's around 12 years to finish that in Denmark at least. 9 years of basic schooling, mandatory schooling plus 3 years of high school, at least the Danish model. Then you get 12 years. And this could be that indeed if people finished an education after that of 3 years. That will fit the picture very well. Are you surprised with this here, Colin?
No, not really. I mean, it matches up with kind of the age statistics that we saw earlier. So this is about what I expected for education.
Yeah, we see that, of course, I capped it at a minimum of 6, and that is for the simple reason that we did have people that said under, but I looked at our sample countries and simply looked what is the minimum mandatory schooling years, and then I stumbled upon 6 years being the minimum mandatory amount of schooling that a person had to have. So if a person was 18 or above, 6 years minimum. Could be that we have outliers that didn't, but I had to draw the line somewhere. Let's look at the degrees here, because we have a lot of people with a bachelor's degree. So we have a nice educated sample, I would like to say. It's very fun to see. A lot of people with some college. We also have people who finished high school just. There's a lot of people also with master's, associate degrees. We even have a few doctors in here. And of course, Colin and I, we did not fill out the survey ourselves. That's not how this works. But I think it's a very nice, we got a very nice sample going here, I think. I apologize for my cough. It's really bad. But I don't have much else to say here. From a point of view for the analysis here, I personally find the years of schooling more interesting in application than this one here. Simply for the fact that years of schooling is a continuous variable you can assess. Whether here, if you use this as a categorical thing, you would have to assume that the jump from, say, a bachelor's to master is the same as a jump from master's to PhD or high school to some college, where we all know that these level jumps are not exactly the same. Again, it's very hard to assess that in a categorical sense, so this will have to be used in a different way. I still think it's interesting. That's why we asked it, of course. Now, Colin, I asked you this earlier, and I'm going to ask it again. United States minor outlying islands. I looked at these lands here, and I must say, as a maybe a stupid European, I don't know where that is. I first thought it was Puerto Rico, but we have that separately here with 2 people in here. So that's not it. Well, do you have an idea what the United States minor outlying islands could be? As a guess, we got 1 person there.
Yeah, it's quite possible that, even they, maybe that person that answered that is from, let's say, Puerto Rico, and they just couldn't quickly find Puerto Rico, and they elected that instead. So it's hard to say. And I am certainly not an expert on all the territories that are somehow affiliated with the U.S. So I don't know what accounts for that one answer, but I would love to meet that person.
Yeah,
So
I
please
would like to
do.
hear that too.
Absolutely. I would love to know their experience as a player and as a citizen of wherever they live.
But this picture we have here, I would also like to say that really confirms where most players are from in terms of playing. We have a large amount from the United States, followed by UK and Brazil, and I think that reflects very much where most players are actually based. Followed by, in this case here, Canada, Denmark, Australia. Needless to say, there may be some bias in the sample in terms of where things have been posted and such, but I still think we have a very good division of people here, because I also, in the next slide here, I segmented people according to region, using the one that was on the leaderboard, which gives you North America, that's basically US and Canada. We have Europe, we have Latin America, which also comprises of everything in South America as well. That's of course where Brazil and Argentina, Chile and so forth falls in. We have Oceania, and that's mostly Australia and New Zealand. We have Asia, and then we have, well, this is the way they segmented Africa, Middle East and India. I think it's Pokemon's way of saying whatever doesn't fit in the first 5 categories. Which I think this is a very nice snapshot, a very good representation of actually the people we see playing across the globe. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think also, I'm from the States and you're from Europe. And so a lot of our network are based here too. And the people that retweeted and, promoted our survey. So this is certainly about what I expected too. I think it's a great snapshot of our community.
I think this is a really great one. And now we come to one I really like this one. Where do you people get their content from? So I apologize for not sorting this one, but it's still easy to figure out what was most. And not surprising, we see YouTube run away as, for 91% of people, they at least used YouTube. So here you just see each of these bars as, from 0 to 1, whether a person used it. So a person could use multiple, of course. People could both use Facebook, Twitch, online articles, and so forth. But we see more than 90% they use YouTube as the major source of their information and content. Not surprised, but I still think it's a lot.
No, I agree. And it would be fascinating to ask this question, have asked this question since the beginning of time and to see how it changes. One thing that surprised me when I came back to the game, for the pandemic is there'd been a shift in written content to recorded content. So, when I stopped playing in 2014 or 15, when I started my long break, most people were writing articles about Pokemon. And now we're seeing that most content is recorded, like what we're doing now here.
I was going to say
eventually, that eventually ends up on YouTube. So it's just really interesting. And I'll just give credit to our community for evolving with the times and the needs and the demands of, the people that enjoy content. So this is really good information.
I think this is definitely very, very interesting. Now, moving on, we have how many people who, well, I already made a comment of people I had to remove if they played the game for more than 25 years. But we have a large share of the sample here that played the game for, say, 5 years or less. Myself, I played the game for, what am I looking at, 16 years? And we also asked whether this was considered a serious activity. And we got a nice competitive vibe going, I would say. It's somewhat serious, so people don't mind winning, of course. Of course, we have around 16.6% here, it seems, to be very serious. We also got a nice little share of casual players, or somewhat casual, so I must admit this is exactly what I expected. People have a competitive drive to play, so they would consider be somewhat serious. But maybe 46.5 is what I'm reading off here. That's almost half the people are somewhat serious. That's a lot. That's still a lot, I think. But not unexpected.
I agree. I'm not very surprised by that either. I think it is reflective of the community, and of course, our level of seriousness changes with time. And I think, if we had regional championships happening, that we might get more folks that say they're very serious as they're preparing for those. But since we don't have those, it's I can certainly see why we only had 16% that said they're very serious about the game.
Yeah, indeed, there could be a shift because, well, we had no events, obviously. So What this means being very serious, people are probably playing a lot of online events, of course. And we did have some very nice big online events, and I'd like to take the chance here to shout out to Limitless for making an excellent platform for online tournaments. That has really carried the community a lot.
Yes.
Major props there. It's really, really well done. And that, of course, have kept the share of very serious players there. Now, we're entering what this survey was actually about. Colin, this is where I have you to make sure that I don't mess up everything in terms of terms and not, because this is outside my area of study. But we asked people whether they felt sad, depressed, miserable recently, and also whether they've been clinically diagnosed. Now, Colin, this is where I want you to take the lead, because I'm on deep water now.
Sure. So, the survey was really geared towards rumination, but we did include a couple questions around depression, because essentially we wanted to know if we're barking up the right tree, because, rumination is a very strong risk factor for depression. So we just wanted to get a feel for, how our community experience depression, if they do or don't. So the self-report, 60% said that they have been sad recently, which is very high, very high, a lot more than I expected. And as far as have you been clinically diagnosed with depression, which can be, recently or ever diagnosed, 23% said yes. And so, I think we should take these with a grain of salt. I think it confirms that we are barking up the right tree, that our community does have a high rate of depression. But I think we would need to ask additional questions and different types of questions to really assess the true prevalence within our community. But looking at these, it certainly, confirms to me that our community suffers with depression.
One thing I would also like to say that maybe contribute to this higher share, because this surprised me, we are in 1.5 years in lockdown, certain restrictions and everything. That has not made people happy. Not gonna come here and say that being locked in your house for the better part of this time here is not. That has contributed. I would say, I don't know how to say it, but that did not help.
I agree. And there are, of course, other mental disorders like anxiety or bipolar disorder that are associated with rumination. So it is certainly, tells me that mental health is problematic in our community, which is very good that we are working on this now.
And with that said, this is where we're going to dive into the rumination questions, because there were 15 of those. Unfortunately, they take up too much space. I apologize for the size here. Colin was nice enough to say, hey, maybe we should write the rumination questions here in the slides so people can reread them now. So here's the first 4. And this picture is, from my point of view, interesting. But maybe, Colin, you have a little more to say about this than me.
So, there are 15 questions to try to, get a sense for how people think, whether they're ruminators or not. And so based on these first 4 questions, if I only saw this, I would think that the people that did our survey aren't ruminators. They skewed more towards the giving responses, 1, 2, or 3, which means these statements do not describe me, though they do not tend to dwell on complicated problems. So this was really interesting. But if we go to the next slide, did you have something to say, Stefan?
No, just confirming indeed I'm scrolling on to the next one here, because I'm the one sitting with the slide button here, right? So we're now looking at 5 to 8. So continue.
Perfect. So, now we begin to see a change in the trends. So now we're seeing more people endorse the 5, 6, or 7, which means these statements do describe me well. And so, the last 2, just looking at really quickly, especially the last one, I find myself daydreaming about things I wish I had done. We begin to see a lot more people endorsing that one, which begins to paint a slightly different picture than what we saw in the first 4 questions. So this begins to suggest that, well, maybe we do have some ruminators in our midst.
I think this is really valid input, like really interesting to see. And it's going to be fun when we're going to, continue with this more in a more academic approach and really look into the study here. It's going to be fun.
Yes, I agree. So then on the next slide, we see that trend continue with more people endorsing the 5, 6, or 7. So, in question 9 and 10, we see more people saying very well, describing very well than any other of the selections. And so, when I feel I've had a bad interaction with someone, I tend to imagine various scenarios where I would have acted differently. Indeed. So a lot of people saying that resonates with them. Then number 10, I find that my mind goes over things again and again. That really resonates with people too. So yes, this is definitely suggesting to me, more analysis is needed, but that it suggests that we do have ruminators in our community.
And then we got 3 more to go.
Yes, and I think that the trend just continues here as well, with more people endorsing the higher numbers.
We especially see with the last one, actually. That one is very interesting.
Yes. And that, that really, I think is, I'm sure people thought about large events like regionals or nationals and worlds. People get very excited about, and that might really intrude in their day-to-day activities. So that was really interesting to see.
One thing that'll be super interesting now when I think about it, Colin, if we are able to, in the future, like say in a year or 2, follow up with part of our sample again to simply ask this again. See, we create a nice little panel to see whether, when we get really past this, or hopefully really past this COVID-19 pandemic, to see how this changes. That would be interesting.
Absolutely, it would be very interesting to see how this changes with time.
But now, I have first one slide here, we kind of put it all together, and there we see indeed the trend, like the average number just increases overall, especially to the highest one being indeed the last one, but closely followed by a few others. But this just to give an overall view of what the mean response was, and we do see indeed higher and higher towards the end on average. But with that said, now we come to the actual experiments, because I was contacted by a few people asking why were those questions at the end. They seem to make no sense, and I swear to you, they made perfect sense. So what's the idea here? We asked 2 questions at the end, where each of the 2 experiments are related to the depression questions that we asked directly. So if people remember, we asked them directly whether they felt sad or miserable or anything recently. And we also asked them directly whether they've been clinically diagnosed with depression. So what do we do? In the first experiment, we looked into more of this, whether they've been feeling sad recently. So what this is a list experiment. That is the control group, that's what's called control A here, has been presented with a list of 4 items. We asked them not which ones, but just how many of these they agree with. So that can be 0 to 4. So the whole point is here, they don't tell us which ones, just how many. And more importantly, people have been randomly distributed between the treatment and control group. That's the most core element here. The treatment group got the same 4 statements, plus a 5th treatment statement, which was the same statement as the one they got directly asked in the survey also. So the statement or the question, whether you felt sad recently, reappeared to them. What we see here, there's a difference here between the treatment and control group of roughly a half. That's very interesting, right? Because now we indirectly ask them instead of directly asking him this way. Because this is anonymous. We don't know which ones they agreed with, just how many. But because of this randomization here, we can simply subtract the 2 means and get the proportion of people who engaged in what we deem to be the sensitive activity, here being, well, have you felt sad recently? We did exactly the same over experiment B. The difference here is the added statement now was, have you been clinically diagnosed? Which is an even more sensitive question, I would argue. Sure, it's sensitive for a lot of people asking directly, have you felt sad or depressed recently? But I would argue it's even more sensitive to ask straight to a person, have you been clinically diagnosed with depression, for instance? So we see again here that if you're in the treatment group, we do see roughly 0.30 difference just on this here. Let me put the course over here. So we got 2.39 in the treatment group and 209 in the control group. So that's the average number of yes responses to these list of items. Now, how do I analyze this? Well, starting with experiment A, so I just copied over the descriptive statistics from A, and I conducted just the t-test, just to confirm whether there's a significant difference between the mean number of items, or the mean number of yes responses in the two lists. We see indeed here there is a significant difference of a roughly 0.56. So let me put a little line up here. And we see here in the bottom, indeed, this is statistically significant. At any given significance level, you would deem this. This is more statistical talk, but cut it short, there is a significant difference between the two of roughly 0.56. Sorry for the cough. So now we have, based on the experiment, how many people engaged in this activity, or in this case, whether they felt sad or depressed or miserable. We can then compare that with the proportion of people who said when we asked them directly, that was the 0.60, you remember? Because there was about 0.60 that said, well, I have felt sad or miserable, whatnot, lately. We compare this and we can make a test of proportions to see where these proportions are different. What is very interesting here, we're comparing 0.60 with 0.56, and we do see, because now we hypothesize, of course, that there's a positive difference, because of course when you subtract these two you get a positive number. You may be quick to say that, well, you had a negative number in the previous picture, Stefan, but no, you're looking at the absolute difference here, of course. So we see here that at least the 10% level, yes, I'm gonna try calling not to be too statistical nonsense here, but we do see some at least mild evidence of a significant difference in proportion. What does this all mean? That means here in this case here, when you ask people directly versus asking them indirectly in such an experiment, people tend to over-report that they felt sad, slightly, just by roughly 4%. I find that very interesting. It's not a big difference, but it's a small difference, where people tend to overstate that they felt sad. Now, on its own, this is still interesting. Just wait till we go to the next experiment, then we're going to see something really interesting, because now we're looking at the direct question of whether you have been diagnosed with depression. Here we observe a difference of 0.30, smaller difference. Again, very significant. So the proportions between the control and treatment group are significantly different. So we do see that roughly 30% engage in this sensitive activity. By this I mean that they responded, in this case, yes, that they have been diagnosed with depression. We have to compare this with the 0.23 when we asked them directly. We do the same test in proportions. And now, of course, we are hypothesizing indeed a negative number here because it was an overstatement when we ask it directly. But that's... or sorry, it was an understatement, sorry. That's my bad. We see that when we asked them directly, roughly 23% said, well, I've been diagnosed. But in reality, when you ask them indirectly, that number goes up by 7%. So we have a case where you ask about being sad. People tend to overstate when asking directly. Whereas when you're in a case where this diagnosis, people tend to understate it. In this case, there will be what I would call a social desirability bias. The socially desirable answer being, I'm perfectly fine. But people here are in this experiment more inclined to admit that they've been diagnosed. That's interesting. Not saying people are liars, it's just whether they're feeling comfortable answering this, of course. But we do see very interesting picture here. Do you have any remarks on this, Colin? I just explained the experiment, and I from a researcher point of view, are very excited with these results, of course.
No, I'm really happy that we we included this experiment because there's obviously a lot of stigma around, the things we're talking about. There's stigma in having a mental disorder or suffering from symptoms of depression. There's stigma in asking for help and even seeking, a diagnosis. There's barriers to getting, seeing a mental health care provider. So I'm very glad that we asked this question, went through the exercise of this experiment because, it's tough things to sort through, and it's tough things to answer. So, to me, it shows mostly people are willing to share, their experience with depression, and I think that's good. Very good indeed.
Oh, I think this is really important, and please, for anybody you listen to out there, don't be afraid of asking for help. This is
Yes.
very important to know that please don't hesitate to ask for help. There's plenty of professionals out there willing to help you, and I think that's very important to be able to. It's a big step, I know, to go and be willing to ask for help. But help yourself. And with that said, I will of course also below this video in the description you can find I'm including some extra literature for people who'll be interested in seeing how such an experiment works. Because of course a lot of people you have never seen this before, but I find a very nice technique, and we can use it in this case here to kind of get more, say, truthful answers out there. Not to tend that people are lying, but more people uncomfortable answering these questions here. And here we find a nice way to get a more precise answer to such a very tough question.
Yes.
And now this brings us to what can we look at further, because we looked at a lot of things, but of course this was mostly a descriptive analysis today. And Colin, so take us through it.
Yeah, so there's still a lot that we want to do with this data. We want to look at some associations between, how serious someone is with their, likelihood to be a ruminator. We want to look at, the folks that self-reported depression, are they more likely to be ruminators? Among those 15 questions on rumination, we can break them down into 4 different categories, so to say. So what kind of ruminator are you? So break those questions or those answers down even more to see, amongst the ruminators in our community, what kind of rumination are they engaging in? And then, more pragmatically, once we finish with the analysis, what should we do with this information? How can we reach these ruminators? Rumination is a style of thinking that can be changed. We can, reduce the level of rumination if we practice and put some work into it. So I think, I feel behooved to help people. Obviously, I'm not a mental health care provider, but I think there are things we can do at the population level within the community to address rumination. So these are some of the things I'm thinking about how to reach ruminators, tournament organizers. Do we want to follow up with an additional survey that's more targeted at other risk factors for depression, like social networks? Or do we want to ask more questions to truly assess the prevalence of depression in our community? So I think there are a lot of next steps, and I'm really eager to continue working on this with you, Stefan.
Oh, same here. This has been already a lot of interesting information to digest, and another further step I can do, or we can do, because we also we made this experiment, but of course there's further things we can do with this experiment, because now we just did the basic difference in proportion, but we can also tie it to certain factors. Are males more likely, or people from America more likely, or we can literally dive down into the subsection analysis and make it more a heterogeneity analysis to really see, what differs here in our population. We have so many things to work here, and I'm also really looking forward to start writing this up here, and hopefully we can make this to a nice academic publication on this here, because I think this will be very interesting, and I hope also that this can help the community, because really highlighting this, because there's something here, and we hope that this can help highlight this and in the long run help people.
Absolutely, I agree.
But yeah, Colin, this brings us only one thing left for today, and that's of course another congratulations to the 3 winners of the ETBs that you so kindly put up for grabs. So thanks, Colin, for doing so. And whether people out there were answering the survey just to get a chance to ETBs or want to contribute to science or both, we thank you very, very much for doing this survey and helping us understand better how Pokemon players tend to think. So, Colin, thank you very much for joining me here today.
It was good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we can update people in the future again how we're progressing with this here. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, everybody else out there, everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope to see you back for another class here in Stefan's Classroom. Bye, guys. Bye.